Alright, y'all, so this is Intro to Ecosystems. It's going to be mostly a review from biology, so it's going to go quick. If you need to, pause the video, stop it, play it at half speed, or whatever you need to. If you feel like you got this from biology, go for it, 2x speed, and then your goal is to be able to complete that interactive assignment. So here we go, just a quick overview of ecosystems, and first we got to get down to some ecology basics. First thing is we have this classification in science, things that are living versus things that are non-living. So we've got some words to describe that. Something that is living or was once living but maybe is now dead is called biotic. Bio, that root means life, kind of like biology. So biotic means living. Some examples, animals, plants, all that good stuff, fungi, bacteria. Non-living things, or they were like never living ever, they're called abiotic. So if you see the prefix a, that usually means not or without. So abiotic means not living. Cool. Some things you might see in an ecosystem that are abiotic are water, sunlight, soil, rocks, air, and temperature. Great. So moving on, we got to figure out what even is an ecosystem and how does it fit in the grand scheme of things. So it's important to figure out how we organize matter. So we start with something really small like an atom, then we go to a cell, an organism like an individual thing like myself. A population is a group of the same species, so like a bunch of people together, a bunch of humans together, because we're all the same species. A community is when you have different species there, so not just humans, but maybe dogs and cats and all of those things. So all of those species interacting together would be a community. And then we get to ecosystem, which is what we're really talking about. This is a combination of all of those living things, different species, plus the environment. So also the abiotic, non-living things is part of an ecosystem. So like in this definition, I have the ecosystem is really both the biotic and abiotic things in an environment. Cool. Moving from there, even bigger scale, we have the biosphere. That's like the Earth, everything that's living on Earth. And then the universe, of course, is this like huge macro thing, all matter in the entire, area. So that's what we've got. Feel free to pause here to take a look at some of these examples from individual all the way up to biosphere. We're talking about scale here. Okay, here are the things that I want you to remember. Number one, ecosystems are interactions between both living and non-living things, and to use the sciencey terms, biotic and abiotic, right? Ecosystems are interdependent with the biosphere. So what that means is we're not in these individual boxes, but if something changes in one ecosystem, that's going to have long-lasting effects on other ecosystems as well, right? Other places, other organisms, everything is interconnected in this. And then the third thing I want you to remember is that things are always changing in ecosystems, whether humans did it or whether they were naturally caused. All right, so let's move on to some ecological relationships. Hopefully you remember this term from bio, symbiosis. The short of it is, it's basically any relationship, any connection between two different species. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be neutral, but basically they're interacting with each other. They're interactions between species. So we're going to talk about 5 different ones. Competition, predation, which is the same as predator-prey relationships, and then 3 kind of symbiotic relationships, mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So before we jump into that really quickly, we got to talk about this. An ecological niche, or you might hear it as ecological niche. I want you to think about like in theater, everyone has a role. So when you sign up for a play, you get cast as a particular role. The same thing here, every organism has their own role, right? An ecological niche for an organism is like, what do they do? What do they need to survive? How do they reproduce? Where do they live? It's basically the essence of who they are as an organism, right? So here's the problem. In theater, we have a director who assigns us all roles, right? And so we don't have like 5 of the same character. But in real life, in nature, we don't have that. So there are potential overlaps that happen with these organisms' niches, right? And so what happens is this thing called competitive exclusion. So competitive exclusion basically says that you can't have two species that have the same role, right? They can't like both live in the same place, eat the same food at the same time. Like it just doesn't work, because then they're going to be competing for resources. So what happens is they either compete and one of them suffers or all of them suffer, or they do this thing called resource partitioning. So this is like the way that organisms come to an agreement together so that they can reduce the amount of competition that they have. So this is basically them deciding like, hey, let's use these resources in different ways or at different places or at different times so that we don't have to like butt heads and we can all benefit from doing something like this. So here's an example. The warblers here, they're different kinds, they're a type of bird, basically use resource partitioning to their advantage by kind of splitting up the area of trees that they will live in, that they will like find shelter, find food, that sort of thing. That way they're not all like, you know, trying to fight for the top of the tree, but instead they all kind of know like, all right, this is my area, this is your area, we're just not going to bother each other, right? So same thing like when y'all are working from home, that's your space to do work. Maybe your parents are doing stuff over there. Like this is your space. Resource partitioning. Yeah. Breaking it up so that we don't have to have a lot of competition. Side note, because English is really hard, inter and intra is something that we're going to see in this class. The prefix inter means between different things, and intra means like within one thing. So when we're talking about inter-specific competition, that's interspecies, so between different species, right? And then intra-specific, intra-species is within one species. Cool, so just making that distinction. And then make sure you know what a species is. It is a group of organisms that are related, and they have to meet these conditions. They have to be able to mate and have offspring, and those offspring also have to be able to have offspring. They have to be fertile. So if they have children that cannot mate and produce fertile offspring, then they are not actually the same species. Fun fact. All right, cool. So the next thing, we talked about competition. This is predation. So let's look at this graph here for a second. It is Hare Lynx data from Canada over the course of 90 years, and they tracked the population. So what you have on the bottom, the x-axis is the year, so over time, and then the y-axis is the number of organisms. So how many hares, how many lynxes. Hares are kind of like rabbits-ish, and then lynxes are big felines. So as we look through this, we can talk about predator-prey relationships. So predator is the thing that hunts, the prey is unfortunately the thing that gets killed and eaten, right? So the thing that I want you all to remember about this is that their populations are reliant on each other, right? If there's a lot of predators, the prey population is inevitably going to go down because the predators are trying to eat all of them, right? But if there is an influx of prey, like there's a lot of prey, eventually there will be more predators because they get to be able to eat all of those prey and have offspring and live and all of those things, right? So they're inherently connected. So if we look back at this graph, you'll see that when we have these peaks and when we have these valleys, they're oftentimes going together, right? The blue and the red lines, the hare and the lynx, they go up and down together. They might be a little bit offset like this, but they're still interacting together. So that's a big thing that I want you all to remember there. All right, cool. Lastly, symbiotic relationships. These three we focused a lot in bio: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So mutualism, like being mutual friends, you know, having mutual friends, both people benefit. So mutualism is when you have two species, for example, a clownfish and a sea anemone, just like I love Finding Nemo. Both of them benefit, right? The clownfish gets a place to live and is protected because they get a place to live. And the sea anemone is also protecting. The clownfish also gets protection from other things. So both of them kind of get protection, both of them benefit there. In the case of commensalism, and I like to call this plus and zero because one organism benefits, one species benefits, the other one is really unaffected. They don't care, doesn't really matter, it's not good or bad, it's pretty neutral. So, for example, species A is a barnacle. Barnacles can live on whales. Whales don't really care, they're just there, doesn't matter. Whales are unaffected. So that would be an example of commensalism. And then finally, parasitism. You've got one species that benefits, the parasite is super happy, but another species is harmed. So the species that's harmed is called a host. So in this example here with the tick and the dog, the tick is obviously the parasite. The tick feeds on blood from the dog. The dog is obviously harmed. It's just like a nuisance, it's awful, and also they're getting, kind of blood taken away from them. So all of the things. So remember these three relationships specifically. So if we take a look at more of these in real life, one of my favorite examples for mutualism is bees and flowers. So bees benefit because they get nectar, they get to use that to make honey. Flowers benefit because they are pollinated. That's basically how they reproduce, right? So both of them benefit in this case. One of my favorite examples for commensalism are these cows or these cattle and these birds called cattle egrets. And basically the idea here is when cows eat and they stomp around in the fields, they kind of rough up the soil and we have insects and stuff that come up. The egrets swoop in and they're able to eat all of those things. And of course, the cows are just doing their thing, so they don't really care, and the egrets get to benefit. So, commensalism. And then finally, parasitism. This one is, super common thing. I get mosquito bites all the time. It's no fun. The parasite, aka the mosquito, benefits because they get food and nutrients. Humans, not a fan. Don't like it. It's itchy. They can spread diseases, right? Lots of different things. All right, cool. Last thing here. All ecosystem components are constantly interacting and changing, right? So competition, predation, all of the other symbiotic relationships, mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, all of those are happening all the time, and they're always changing depending on the resources, the needs, and the environment. So things to keep in mind as we move forward and when we talk about food webs next time around. So we're going to talk about food webs, how that interaction affects the entire ecosystem. Please go ahead and work on this interactive. After you've watched the video, feel free to go back in time if you need to see something else. But otherwise, I will see you all in the future.